the city of Lagos, where ambition moved faster than traffic and success was measured in silence, not noise, Obinna Okafor had mastered the art of being seen without ever truly being known. At just 30 years old, he was already a name people spoke carefully. Not loudly, not casually, but with a certain respect that came from understanding exactly who and what he was. Obinna wasn't just rich. He was calculated. His wealth didn't come from luck or inheritance alone, though his late father had left behind a respectable foundation. Obinna had taken that foundation and turned it into an empire. Oil contracts, real estate developments stretching across Lekki and Victoria Island, quiet investments in tech startups that later exploded into multimillion-dollar ventures. He didn't chase trends, he anticipated them. And that was what made him dangerous. Every morning, his day began before sunrise. While most of Lagos still stretched lazily beneath the early light, Obinna was already awake, standing by the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of his bedroom, overlooking the vast compound of his mansion. The house itself was a masterpiece. White marble floors, sleek modern architecture, and a quiet elegance that whispered wealth instead of shouting it. He liked it that way. Noise attracted attention. Attention attracted problems. And Obinna hated problems. That morning was no different. He stood in silence, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a glass of water. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, sharp jawline, composed expression, eyes that missed nothing. But behind those eyes, there was always movement, always thinking, always analyzing. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Sir, your breakfast is ready," one of the house staff announced from behind the door. "I'll be down shortly," Obinna replied, his voice calm, steady. He didn't turn immediately. Instead, he remained there for a few seconds longer, staring out at the world he had built. Everything looked perfect. Everything was perfect. So why did it feel like something was off? The dining room was spacious, minimal, and tastefully decorated. A long glass table sat at the center, already set with a neatly arranged breakfast, toast, eggs, fruits, freshly squeezed juice. And seated at the table, scrolling through her phone, was Amara. She looked up as he entered, her face instantly lighting up with a warm smile. "Good morning, baby," she said, rising to her feet. Amara was the kind of woman people noticed without trying. Tall, elegant, with smooth dark skin that seemed to glow under any light. Her features were soft but defined, her presence commanding without effort. She walked over and kissed him lightly. "You slept late again," she added, studying his face. "Work doesn't sleep," Obinna replied, taking his seat. Amara smiled faintly. "That's because you don't let it." She sat across from him, picking up her fork. For a moment, everything seemed normal, comfortable, familiar. But Obinna, as always, was watching. Not obviously. Not in a way anyone could easily detect. But he noticed the small things, the slight delay before her smile reached her eyes, the way her attention drifted back to her phone every few seconds, the subtle tension in her posture when certain topics came up. He had been noticing for a while now. First, he dismissed it. No relationship was perfect. But over time, those small inconsistencies began to form a pattern. And Obinna didn't believe in coincidences. "Have you thought about the guest list?" Amara asked, breaking the silence. "For what?" Obinna replied, though he already knew. "Our wedding," she said, giving him a playful look. "Or have you forgotten already?" He allowed a small smile. "I don't forget important things." "Good," she said, leaning back slightly. "Because this wedding has to be perfect. People are already talking about it." That word again. People. Obinna's gaze flickered briefly. "Are they?" he asked calmly. "Of course," Amara replied. "You're Obinna Okafor. Do you know how many people want to attend this wedding? It's going to be the event of the year." She sounded excited, but not in the way that matched how he felt about marriage. To Obinna, Marriage wasn't an event. It wasn't about appearances. It wasn't about people. It was supposed to be about certainty, trust, something solid. But when he looked at Amara in that moment, all he saw was someone focused on the spectacle, not the substance. They had met 2 years ago at a charity gala. Obinna hadn't even wanted to attend. Events like that bored him. Too many fake smiles, too many conversations that led nowhere. But his presence was expected. So he went. And that was where he saw her. Amara stood out immediately, not because she tried to, but because she didn't need to. While others worked hard to impress, she seemed effortless. She approached him first. That alone had intrigued him. Most people didn't. They spoke that night, really spoke. Not about business, not about money, but about life, values, and ambition. Or at least, that was what it felt like. Looking back now, Obinna wasn't entirely sure how much of it had been real. But at the time, it had been enough. He asked her out. She said yes. And everything moved quickly after that. Too quickly. Obinna! Her voice pulled him back to the present. He realized he had gone quiet. Yes. I asked if you're okay, she said, her brows slightly furrowed. I'm fine, he replied. She studied him for a moment longer, then shrugged it off. You've just been distant lately, she added. Busy, he corrected. Amara didn't argue, but the look she gave him lingered. Later that afternoon, Obinna sat in his home office, going through documents on his tablet. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. His phone buzzed. A message from his business partner in the United States. The deal is ready. We need you here in person. Obinna leaned back in his chair. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. A major expansion. One that would elevate everything. He stared at the message for a few seconds. Then another thought entered his mind. Slow. Deliberate. What if? He sat up slightly. What if he used this trip for something else? Something personal. Something important. Obinna placed the tablet down. His expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. This was how his mind worked. He didn't react emotionally. He strategized. If there was doubt, he addressed it. And right now there was doubt. About Amara. About her love. About her intentions. And Obinna wasn't the kind of man who entered marriage with uncertainty. That was a mistake he could never afford. That evening, he found Amara in the living room, watching television. I need to travel, he said simply. She looked up immediately. Travel? Where? America. Business. For how long? A month. Her expression shifted just slightly. That's long, she said. It's necessary. She nodded slowly. Okay, she replied. I'll miss you. He walked closer. I'll be back before you know it. She smiled, but there was something behind it. Something Obinna couldn't ignore. And in that moment, his decision was made. This trip wouldn't just be about business. It would be about truth. That night, as they lay in bed, Amara rested her head on his chest. You won't forget about me over there, right? She asked softly. Obinna looked down at her. Impossible. She smiled, closing her eyes. But Obinna didn't sleep immediately. He stared at the ceiling, his mind already mapping out every step, every detail, every outcome. Because once he started this, there would be no turning back. Outside, Lagos continued its restless rhythm. Cars moving, people hustling, life unfolding without pause. But inside that mansion, something had quietly shifted. What once looked like a perfect love story was about to be tested. And Obinna Okafor, the man who had everything, was about to find out if he truly had the one thing that mattered most, or if he had been living inside a very beautiful lie. The departure morning came with a quiet kind of urgency, the type that didn't shout, but pressed gently on everything around it. At exactly 6:15 a.m., Obinna stepped out of his mansion in Lekki, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit. his travel bag carried by one of the house staff. The early Lagos air was cool, a rare softness before the heat and chaos of the day would take over. His black SUV waited at the driveway, engine already running. Amara stood by the entrance, arms folded lightly across her chest, watching him. "You're really leaving this early?" she asked, her voice carrying a trace of reluctance. Obinna adjusted his wristwatch. "Traffic doesn't respect important people." She smirked. "You think you're that important?" "I know I am." She laughed softly and walked toward him, closing the distance between them. For a moment, everything felt warm again, easy, like the earlier days. She reached up and straightened his collar, a small gesture that might have meant more if Obinna didn't already question everything. "Call me when you land," she said. "I will. And don't get too busy for me." Obinna held her gaze. "I won't." There was a pause, brief but noticeable. Then she leaned in and kissed him. It was soft, perfectly timed, perfectly delivered, and somehow, still not enough. Obinna smiled faintly, then turned and entered the SUV without looking back. As the gates of the mansion slowly opened, he exhaled deeply. The test had already begun. The flight to the United States was long, but Obinna barely noticed. His mind was occupied half with business, half with something far more personal. He wasn't a man who made emotional decisions. Everything he did had structure, purpose, and outcome. Even this, especially this. As the plane soared above the clouds, Obinna pulled out his tablet and reviewed the deal he had traveled for. A multimillion-dollar partnership with an American energy firm that would expand his influence beyond Nigeria. It was big, very big. But for once, it wasn't the most important thing on his mind. Instead, he found himself replaying moments with Amara. The way she smiled, the way she spoke, the subtle shifts he had ignored at first. There were questions he hadn't asked, answers he hadn't demanded, and now he was going to get them, not by asking, but by observing. America welcomed him with its usual cold efficiency. Fast systems, structured schedules, and no room for delay. Within days, Obinna was fully immersed in meetings, boardrooms, presentations, negotiations. He moved like he always did, sharp, composed, controlled. And as expected, he delivered. The deal closed in less than 3 weeks. Not just successfully, but brilliantly. The kind of deal that didn't just increase wealth, it multiplied it. By the time everything was signed, Obinna's net worth had crossed into a new territory. Billionaire, a word many chased, a reality few handled well. But Obinna didn't celebrate, not outwardly. That wasn't who he was. Instead, he sat alone in his luxury hotel suite that night, staring out at the glittering city lights. He had won, again, but the victory felt incomplete. Because there was still one thing left unresolved. Amara. During his time away, their communication had been consistent. First, she called often, checked on him, told him she missed him. But as the weeks passed, something changed. The calls became shorter, less frequent, more distracted. Sometimes she sounded rushed, other times uninterested. And then there were moments when she didn't pick up at all. When she finally returned the call, there was always an explanation. "I was out. I fell asleep. My phone was on silent." Excuses, reasonable ones. But Obinna didn't deal in surface-level explanations. He paid attention to patterns. And the pattern was shifting. On the final night before his return to Lagos, Obinna stood in front of the mirror in his hotel room. His reflection stared back at him, unchanged on the surface, still composed, still controlled. But inside, something had hardened. He had everything now, more than everything, and yet, he was preparing to walk back into his life pretending he had nothing. It was almost ironic, but necessary, because money had a way of revealing truth, not by what it gave, but by what it exposed. The flight back to Nigeria felt different. There was no anticipation, no excitement, just focus. Obinna had already decided how it would go. Every detail planned, every reaction anticipated. By the time the plane landed at Murtala Muhammad International Airport, he was ready. Amara was waiting for him at the arrival terminal. Dressed beautifully as always, hair perfectly styled, outfit carefully chosen. She smiled the moment she saw him, waving slightly. To anyone watching, it looked like the reunion of a loving couple. Obinna walked toward her slowly. She ran into his arms. "I missed you," she said, hugging him tightly. "I missed you too," he replied. And for a brief moment, it almost felt real again. Almost. The drive back to the mansion was quiet. Too quiet. Amara talked about Lagos, about her friends, about events he had missed. But Obinna's responses were short, measured. He wasn't playing his role yet. Not fully. He needed the right moment. Came that night. After dinner. After the staff had cleared the table. After the house had settled into its usual calm. They sat in the living room. Amara curled up comfortably on the couch, scrolling through her phone. Obinna stood by the window, staring out into the darkness. Then quietly he spoke. "Amara." She looked up. He turned slowly. "There's something I need to tell you." Something in his tone made her sit up. "What is it?" Obinna walked closer, his expression carefully controlled. "I lost everything." The words landed heavy. Amara blinked. "What do you mean?" "My money," he said. "All of it." She frowned. "Obinna, stop joking." "I'm not joking." Silence. Her face changed. Confusion first. Then disbelief. Then something else. Something harder to define. "How?" she asked slowly. "I was scammed," he replied. "The deal, it wasn't real. They took everything. Every account. Every asset I moved into it. Gone." Amara stared at him, completely still. No, that's not possible," she said, shaking her head. "You don't just lose everything like that." "I did." The room felt smaller, tighter. "Obinna." Her voice dropped. "How much are we talking about?" He held her gaze. "All of it." The silence that followed was different this time. Not emotional, not comforting, but calculating. Amara stood up slowly. Her mind was racing. "That means the accounts here, the properties, the cars. Some will have to go," Obinna said calmly. "Some?" she repeated. "Yes." She laughed. But there was no humor in it. "You're telling me you went to America and came back broke?" Obinna said nothing. He simply watched her. And that was when it happened. The shift. Subtle, but undeniable. The concern in her eyes didn't deepen. It sharpened, turned inward. "What are we going to do?" she asked. "We adjust," he replied. "We'll sell what we can. Downsize. Start again." "Start again?" she echoed, almost offended. "Yes." Amara took a step back, as if distance would help her process this. This doesn't make sense," she muttered. "It doesn't have to," Obinna said quietly. "It already happened." She turned away from him, running a hand through her hair. "This is insane," she whispered. Then she turned back. "What about the wedding?" There it was. Not "Are you okay?" Not "How are you handling this?" But the wedding. Obinna noticed. Of course he did. "We'll postpone it," he said. Her face fell. "Postpone?" "Yes." "For how long?" "Until things stabilize." Amara stared at him like he had just spoken a foreign language. "This can't be happening," she said under her breath. Obinna stepped closer. "This is where we are," he said firmly. "We deal with it." Amara didn't respond immediately. She just looked at him. And for the first time since he returned, there was distance in her eyes. Real distance. Not physical. Emotional. And Obinna felt it. Not as pain, but as confirmation. The test was working. That night, they went to bed in silence. Amara lay on one side, facing away from him. Obinna lay on the other, staring at the ceiling. Neither of them slept easily, but for very different reasons. Outside, the city moved on as it always did, unaware, unbothered. But inside that mansion, everything had changed, and Obinna knew this was only the beginning. The morning after Obinna revealed his loss arrived quietly, but nothing about it felt normal. The mansion was still the same. The marble floors still gleamed. The chandeliers still shimmered under the soft morning light. Everything looked untouched. But beneath that surface, something had shifted. Something fragile had begun to crack. Obinna woke early as usual. Routine had always been his anchor. Something steady in a world that constantly moved. Even now, with the lie he had introduced into his life, he refused to let that change. He stepped out onto his balcony, the cool breeze brushing against his face. From there, he could see the entire compound. Security at the gates, gardeners already at work, the stillness of wealth holding its shape. For a brief moment, everything looked exactly the same. But Obinna knew better. He wasn't looking at his environment anymore. He was watching a test unfold. And today would be the first real indicator. When he entered the dining room, breakfast was already set. But Amara wasn't there. That alone was unusual. She was rarely absent in the mornings, especially after he returned from a trip. Normally, she would be waiting, eager, attentive, playing her role effortlessly. Obinna sat down anyway. Minutes passed, then 10, then 15. Still no sign of her. He didn't call out. He didn't ask the staff. He simply ate, because he understood something important. People reveal themselves best when they think no one is watching. Amara finally appeared almost 30 minutes later. She walked in slowly, dressed casually, her hair slightly undone. Nothing like the polished version of herself from the day before. "Morning," she said, her voice flat. Obinna looked up briefly. "Good morning." She didn't come closer, didn't kiss him, didn't ask how he slept. Instead, she went straight to the fridge, poured herself a glass of juice, and leaned against the counter. That was new, very new. Obinna watched quietly. "Did you eat already?" she asked without looking at him. "Yes." Silence followed. Uncomfortable, unfamiliar, and very telling. "Have you started making calls?" she asked after a while. Obinna placed his fork down. "Calls? To your banks, your contacts, anyone who can help fix this," she said, her tone carrying a subtle edge. "I'm handling it," he replied calmly. She scoffed lightly. "Handling it? Obinna, you said you lost everything. This isn't something you handle slowly." "I said I'm handling it." His voice wasn't raised, but it was firm. Amara turned to face him now, irritation flickering across her expression. "You're being too calm about this," she said. "And you're being too anxious," he replied. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Of course I'm anxious," she snapped. "Do you even understand what this means?" "Yes." "Then why are you acting like it's not a big deal?" Obinna held her gaze. "Because panic doesn't solve problems." That answer didn't satisfy her. In fact, it seemed to irritate her even more. She shook her head and turned away. "I don't understand you," she muttered. But Obinna understood her perfectly, and what he was seeing was not reassuring. The changes didn't happen all at once. They came in layers, subtle at first, then undeniable. By the third day, Amara stopped coming to the dining table entirely. She would wake up late, eat alone, and spend most of her time on her phone or out of the house. Obinna didn't question it, didn't confront her. He simply observed. Every action, every shift, every detail. The first real argument came on the 5th day. It started over something small. It always did. Obinna was in his office reviewing some documents when Amara walked in without knocking. "We need to talk," she said. He looked up. About. She crossed her arms. This house. Obinna leaned back slightly. What about it? We can't keep living like this if you're broke, she said bluntly. There was no softness, no hesitation, just the word. Broke. Obinna noticed. Of course he did. We're not moving immediately, he replied. There are processes. Processes? She echoed. Obinna, do you know how expensive it is to maintain this place? Yes. Then why are we still here? Because rushing decisions leads to mistakes. Amara laughed, a short, sharp sound. So now we're being careful? After you lost everything, that one landed harder than the others. But Obinna didn't react. Instead, he stood up slowly. What exactly are you trying to say, Amara? She hesitated, just for a second. Then, I'm saying you should have been more careful, she said. There it was. Blame. Clear. Direct. Unfiltered. Obinna studied her face. No regret. No concern. Just frustration. And disappointment. But not in the situation. In him. Noted, he said calmly. That response caught her off guard. That's it? She asked. What else do you want me to say? I don't know something, she snapped. This is our life we're talking about. Our life, Obinna repeated. Yes. Then act like it. The words hung in the air, heavy, sharp, and for the first time since this began, Amara had no immediate response. She turned away quickly, clearly irritated. I can't deal with this right now, she said, heading for the door. Obinna didn't stop her, didn't call her back. He simply watched her leave. And when the door closed behind her, he exhaled slowly, not out of stress, but out of clarity. The cracks were no longer forming. They were spreading. By the end of the week, the house began to change. Not physically, but emotionally. The warmth was gone. The laughter had disappeared. And in its place was a quiet tension that lingered in every corner. The staff noticed it too. They spoke less, moved more carefully, because even without understanding the details, they could feel it. Amara, meanwhile, became distant, not just emotionally, physically. She started going out more often, sometimes during the day, sometimes at night, always with vague explanations. I'm meeting a friend. I need some fresh air. I can't sit in this house all day. Obinna never questioned her. Not once. And that unsettled her more than anything else. One evening, she returned home late, close to midnight. Obinna was in the living room reading. He didn't look up when she entered. You're still awake? She asked, surprised. Yes. She hesitated near the doorway. You didn't call. No. Another pause. You didn't even ask where I was. Obinna turned a page calmly. I assumed you knew where you were. That answer irritated her. I could have been anywhere, she said. And yet you're here, he replied. Amara stared at him, trying to understand him, failing. You're acting strange, she said finally. Obinna looked up now. No, he said quietly. I'm just paying attention. That made her uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. She looked away quickly. I'm tired, she muttered, walking toward the bedroom. But Obinna noticed something important. For the first time, she avoided his eyes. That night, as he lay in bed beside her, Obinna stared into the darkness. The woman next to him breathed softly, her back turned to him. Once upon a time, that would have meant nothing. Now, it meant everything. Distance, disconnection, detachment. He thought back to who she used to be, or rather, who he believed she was. The loving partner, the supportive woman, the one who claimed she would stand by him no matter what. And now he was seeing something else, someone else. And the realization didn't hurt as much as it should have. Because deep down, Obinna had already prepared himself for this. The next morning, the decision was made. It was time for the next phase, the real test, Not just words, not just reactions, but action, change, reality. Because if Amara's love was truly real, it would survive discomfort. If it wasn't, then what was about to happen next would reveal everything. As the sun rose over Lagos once again, casting golden light across the mansion, Obinna stood by the window, his expression unreadable. Everything still looked perfect from the outside, but inside, the mirror had cracked, and soon, it was going to shatter. By the time Obinna decided to take the next step, the air inside the mansion had already changed. Not in a way outsiders would notice. The floors still shined. The gates still opened smoothly. The staff still bowed with quiet respect. But beneath that polished surface, something had gone cold. What used to feel like a home now felt like a place people simply occupied. And Obinna knew exactly why. It began on a quiet Monday morning. Amara was seated in the living room, her legs crossed, scrolling through her phone with a distant expression. The television played in the background, but she wasn't watching it. She hadn't been present in anything for days. Obinna walked in, dressed simply, no suit, no formal presence, just a plain shirt and trousers. It was intentional. He was already easing into the version of himself he wanted her to see. "We need to talk," he said. Amara didn't look up immediately. "About what?" she asked, her tone lacking interest. "The house." That got her attention. She lifted her eyes slowly. "What about it?" Obinna stepped closer, calm as ever. "I've started the process to sell it." The words hung in the air. Amara blinked. Then she sat up. "You're serious?" "Yes." Her phone dropped slightly in her hand. "You're actually selling the house?" "Yes." A pause. Then, "Obinna, this is madness. It's necessary." "No, it's not," she snapped, standing up. "There are other options." "Like what?" "I don't know, loans, connections, something," she said, clearly frustrated. "You don't just give up everything like this." Obinna studied her carefully. "I'm not giving up," he said. "I'm adjusting." Amara laughed bitterly. "Adjusting?" she repeated. "This is not adjusting, Obinna. This is falling apart." There it was again. Not we, not us, but you. Within 2 weeks, the for sale process had quietly begun. Potential buyers came and went. Inspectors walked through the house. Papers were signed. And with every step forward, Amara grew more restless, more irritable, more distant. The first real sign came one evening. Obinna returned from a meeting to find the kitchen empty. No food, no preparation, nothing. That had never happened before. Even during their worst arguments, Amara had always maintained certain routines. But now, those routines were disappearing. He walked into the living room. She was there, lying on the couch, watching something on her phone. "You didn't cook?" he asked. She didn't even look up. "I wasn't in the mood." Obinna paused. "In the mood?" "Yes," she said casually. "I'm not your housewife, Obinna." The statement wasn't loud, but it was sharp. He nodded slowly. "Noted." She glanced at him briefly, almost expecting a reaction. But he gave her none, and that irritated her more than if he had argued. Days later, the situation escalated. The mansion was officially sold. The cars were gradually being taken away. The staff had been reduced to just 2 people. And the next step was unavoidable. They had to leave. The apartment Obinna chose was small. Not terrible, but far from the luxury they were used to. It sat in a crowded neighborhood where the streets were always alive. Children playing, traders shouting, generators humming. It was real, raw, unfiltered. And for the first time in a long time, Obinna felt grounded. Amara, on the other hand, looked like she had just stepped into a nightmare. "This is where we're living?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief. Obinna dropped his bag inside the small living room. "Yes." Amara stood at the entrance, not moving. You can't be serious. I am. She looked around slowly, the worn walls, the small space, the lack of elegance. This place is suffocating, she said under her breath. It's temporary. How temporary? She snapped. As long as it needs to be. That answer didn't sit well with her. Of course it didn't. The first few days were tolerable. Not peaceful, but controlled. Amara still tried, just enough to maintain the image of someone trying. She arranged the space, cooked occasionally, even smiled once or twice. But Obinna saw through it, because it wasn't natural. It was effort, forced. An effort, when not backed by genuine feeling, doesn't last. By the second week, the change became obvious. Amara stopped trying. Completely. She no longer woke up early. No longer cleaned. No longer cooked. The small apartment quickly lost any sense of warmth. Clothes lay around carelessly. Dishes piled up. The air itself felt heavier. And with that physical change came a deeper shift. Her attitude. You need to fix this, she said one afternoon, pacing the small room. Fix what? Obinna asked calmly. This situation, she snapped. This life. This is our life right now. No, she corrected sharply. This is your mistake. The words hit harder than anything she had said before. Obinna looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't see the woman he proposed to. You've changed, he said quietly. Amara froze. Then she laughed, defensive. I've changed? Obinna, you're the one who lost everything. I'm aware. Then act like it, she snapped. Do something. Be a man and fix it. There was anger in her voice now. Real anger. Not frustration. Not stress. But something deeper. Resentment. Obinna stood up slowly. I am doing something, he said. Oh really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're just existing. Her words were cruel, deliberate, and she knew it. That night she didn't come home. For the first time, Obinna sat alone in the dimly lit apartment, the silence louder than ever. He didn't call her, didn't text, didn't react, because this was exactly what he needed to see. When she finally returned the next morning, she walked in casually, as if nothing had happened. Where were you? Obinna asked. She shrugged. Out. All night. Yes. With who? She paused. Then, friends. The lie was obvious, but Obinna didn't push. Okay, he said, and that single word unsettled her more than any confrontation could have. You're not even going to question me? She asked. No. Why? Because I'm paying attention. That phrase again. And once again, it made her uncomfortable. The distance between them grew wider each day. Conversations became shorter. Tension became normal. Respect, gone. And then came the moment that sealed everything. One evening, as Obinna entered the apartment, he noticed something different. Amara was dressed up. Not casually, not simply, but expensively. Her outfit didn't match their reality. Her perfume filled the room. Her confidence had returned, but not for him. Where are you going? He asked. She smiled faintly. Out. With who? She tilted her head slightly. Does it matter? Obinna didn't answer, because in that moment, he already knew. As she walked past him, heading for the door, she paused briefly. Then she said, I can't keep living like this, Obinna. Her tone wasn't emotional. It wasn't sad. It was final. The door closed behind her. And just like that, the last piece of the illusion shattered. Obinna stood there in silence. Not angry, not broken, but certain. The test was no longer a question. It was an answer, and whatever came next would only confirm what he already knew. The mask hadn't just slipped. It had fallen completely, and the woman he thought he loved, she was gone. Or maybe she was never truly there at all. By the third week in the cramped apartment, The illusion of adjustment had fully collapsed. There was no more pretending, no more effort, no more carefully timed smiles or forced concern. Whatever version of Amara had once tried to maintain appearances was gone. What remained was raw, unfiltered, and impossible to ignore. The apartment itself had begun to reflect the tension between them. The once neat space was now disorganized. Clothes tossed carelessly across chairs, dishes left unwashed in the sink, the air thick with neglect. It wasn't just untidiness. It was a statement. Amara had stopped trying to make anything feel like home. And Obinna noticed. Of course he did. But he didn't complain, didn't correct, didn't even acknowledge it. Because at this point, every action or lack of it was data. And Obinna was collecting everything. That morning, he woke up earlier than usual. The room was quiet except for the low hum of a generator outside. He turned slightly and saw Amara beside him, still asleep, her back turned as always. That had become her default position. Away from him, always away. He sat up slowly, running a hand across his face. There was no anger in him anymore, just clarity. The kind that comes when you finally stop hoping for something to change. By the time Amara woke up, Obinna was already seated in the living room, going through a small stack of documents. She walked out lazily, stretching. "You're up early," she muttered. "I always am," he replied without looking up. She didn't respond. Instead, she went straight to her phone, scrolling absent-mindedly as she dropped onto the couch. A few minutes passed in silence. Then, "I'm going out today," she said. Obinna nodded slightly. "Okay." She glanced at him. "You don't want to ask where?" "No." That annoyed her. He could tell. "Interesting," she said under her breath. Around noon, she left. And this time, she didn't bother to hide it. She stepped out dressed in clothes that clearly didn't belong to the life they were living anymore. Designer heels, a fitted dress, expensive accessories. Everything about her screamed luxury. Everything about their apartment screamed the opposite. The contrast was jarring and deliberate. Obinna watched from the window as she walked down the street, her posture confident, her expression untouched by the reality she had left behind. Then she entered a sleek car waiting at the corner. Not just any car, a red Ferrari. It gleamed even under the dusty Lagos sun. Out of place in that neighborhood, like a drop of wealth in a sea of struggle. Obinna's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in understanding. The car drove off, and with it, whatever was left of the relationship he thought he had. She didn't return that evening, or the next, or the one after that. On the third day, Obinna sat alone in the apartment, the quiet now familiar. He had stopped expecting her, stopped questioning, stopped caring about where she went or who she was with, because the answer had already been revealed. When the knock finally came, it was unexpected, sharp, confident, not hesitant like a neighbor or a delivery. Obinna stood up slowly and walked to the door. When he opened it, he wasn't surprised. Amara stood there, but she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a man, tall, well-dressed, exuding the kind of confidence that came from money or the illusion of it. He wore sunglasses despite the fading evening light, his posture relaxed, almost arrogant, and parked just behind them was the same red Ferrari. Obinna leaned slightly against the doorframe. "Come in," he said calmly. They entered without hesitation. Amara walked in first, her heels clicking against the floor, her expression unreadable. The man followed, looking around the small apartment with faint amusement. "This is where you live now?" he asked casually. Obinna ignored the question. Instead, he closed the door behind them. Amara didn't waste time. She turned to face him, arms crossed. "This is Richard," she said. The man gave a slight nod, a smug smile playing on his lips. "Nice to meet you," Richard added. Obinna didn't respond. He simply looked at Amara, waiting. "I'll go straight to the point," she continued. I'm leaving you. Silence. The words hung there, heavy, but not surprising. Not anymore. Obina's face remained calm, unmoved. Okay, he said. That response caught her off guard. What do you mean, okay? She asked, frowning. It means I heard you. She stared at him, clearly expecting something else. Anger, desperation, reaction, anything. But not this. I'm serious, Obina, she said sharply. I'm done. I can see that. Her frustration grew. You're not even going to ask why? No. Why not? She snapped. Obina tilted his head slightly. Because it's obvious. That stung. She could feel it. And for a brief moment, something flickered in her eyes. Something close to discomfort. But it passed quickly. I didn't sign up for this, she said, gesturing around the apartment. This life, this struggle, it's not for me. Obina nodded slowly. I understand. Richard stepped forward slightly, placing a hand casually on Amara's shoulder. She deserves better, he said. Obina glanced at him briefly, then back at Amara. Then she should go get it. That response shifted the atmosphere. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't bitter. It was dismissive, and somehow that made it worse. Amara reached into her bag and pulled out something small. The engagement ring. For a moment she held it, as if deciding how much it still meant. Then, she dropped it on the table. The sound was soft, but final. I don't need this anymore, she said. Obina looked at the ring, then back at her. Clearly, there was no argument, no pleading, no attempt to stop her, and that unsettled her more than anything else. Let's go, Richard said, clearly bored. Amara hesitated for a split second. Just a second. But Obina saw it. Then she turned and walked out. The sound of her heels faded. The door closed, and moments later, the Ferrari engine roared to life. Obina stood there in silence, listening, until the sound disappeared completely. Then he walked slowly to the table, picked up the ring, and stared at it. 2 years. Promises. Plans. Everything reduced to this. He exhaled quietly, not in pain, not in regret, but in release. The test was over, and the result was clear. That night, Obina didn't sit inside. He stepped out of the apartment and walked aimlessly through the streets. The world around him moved as usual. People talking, laughing, hustling. Life didn't pause for heartbreak. It never did. Eventually, he found himself sitting by the roadside. No destination, no plan, just stillness. For the first time since everything began, he allowed himself to feel it. Not anger, not sadness, but something deeper, a quiet disappointment, not in her, but in what he had believed. He lowered his head, his hands resting on his knees. And for a brief moment, the strong, controlled Obina Okafor looked like a man who had lost something real. And that was when a soft voice broke through the silence. Sir, are you okay? Obina looked up slowly, and there she was, a young woman, simple, humble, carrying a tray of oranges on her head. Her eyes filled with concern. Not curiosity, not judgment, but genuine concern. And in that moment, something shifted. Because sometimes, life takes everything from you, just to place something real right in front of you. And Obina was about to find that out. The afternoon heat pressed down on the neighborhood like a heavy hand. Dust hung lazily in the air, stirred by passing okadas and the restless movement of people going about their day. Children chased a worn-out football along the roadside, their laughter rising above the hum of generators and distant market noise. It was the kind of place where nothing extraordinary ever happened. Until that day, Obina sat by the small window of the apartment, his gaze fixed outside but his mind elsewhere. It had been days since Amara walked out, days since the echo of that Ferrari faded into silence. And yet, The image hadn't left him. Her standing there, confident, certain, unaffected, dropping the ring like it meant nothing. It replayed in his mind, not painfully, not even angrily, but with a strange sense of detachment, as though he had watched someone else's life fall apart. He had expected disappointment, maybe even betrayal, but not ease, not the way she had walked away without hesitation. That was what stayed with him. The apartment was quiet, too quiet, no arguments, no tension, just stillness. And for the first time in weeks, Obinna found himself breathing easier. It surprised him. The absence of conflict felt peaceful, but it also left a space, an emptiness he wasn't used to. A sudden sound broke through his thoughts. A car. Not just any car. A loud, unmistakable engine, smooth, powerful, expensive, completely out of place. Obinna's eyes shifted toward the street, and then he saw it. The red Ferrari. It rolled slowly into the narrow street, its glossy body catching the sunlight, turning heads instantly. People stopped what they were doing. A woman selling vegetables paused mid-call. A group of young men leaned closer, whispering. Children ran toward the car, their eyes wide with excitement. It didn't belong there, and that was exactly why it commanded attention. Obinna didn't move immediately. He simply watched, because deep down, he already knew. The Ferrari came to a smooth stop directly in front of his building. The engine purred softly. Then, the door opened. Amara stepped out. She looked transformed. Gone was the irritation, the frustration, the bitterness she carried in the apartment. In its place was confidence, ease, almost pride. She adjusted her sunglasses, her outfit flawless, every detail intentional. She looked like the version of herself that once stood beside him at high-profile events. Only now, she wasn't standing beside him. A few seconds later, the driver's door opened. Richard stepped out, tall, relaxed, completely comfortable in the attention surrounding him. He handed his car keys to a young boy nearby as though it was the most natural thing in the world. "Don't touch anything," he said casually. The boy nodded eagerly. Together, they walked toward the building, toward Obinna. Inside the apartment, Obinna stood up slowly. There was no rush in his movements, no panic, no anger, just awareness. A knock came at the door, firm, confident, not the kind that asked for permission. Obinna walked over and opened it. Amara stood there, Richard beside her. The same scene as before, but this time felt different. "Can we come in?" she asked, though her tone suggested she had already decided. Obinna stepped aside. Richard looked around again, taking in the small space with a faint smirk. "You're really staying here," he said, almost amused. Obinna ignored him completely. His focus was on Amara. She walked into the center of the room, then turned to face him. Her posture was straight, her expression firm, but there was something underneath it, something she was trying to suppress. "I didn't come here to waste time," she said. Obinna nodded slightly. "I figured." Richard leaned casually against the wall, watching the exchange like it was entertainment. Amara took a deep breath. Then, "I meant what I said the last time," she began. "I'm not coming back." Obinna didn't interrupt, didn't react. He simply listened. "I've moved on," she continued. "I'm with someone who understands the kind of life I want." She gestured subtly toward Richard. Obinna's eyes followed the gesture briefly, then returned to her. "And what kind of life is that?" he asked. Amara didn't hesitate. "A better one." The answer was immediate, confident, and painfully revealing. Obinna nodded slowly. "I see." Silence settled between them, heavy, but not tense. Not for him. "You're taking this too calmly," Amara said, narrowing her eyes slightly. "Should I be shouting?" he asked. "Normal people would react," she snapped. Obinna tilted his head slightly. "Maybe I'm not normal." That response threw her off balance. Again, Richard chuckled softly. I like him, he said. He's calm. But calm doesn't pay bills. Obinna glanced at him briefly, then back at Amara. Is that why you're here? He asked. To explain your decision? Amara hesitated. Then, yes. No, Obinna said quietly. You came for something else. Her expression shifted. Just slightly. I don't know what you mean. Obinna stepped closer. Not aggressively, but deliberately. You didn't need to come here, he said. You already left. You already made your choice. A pause. So why come back? The question lingered. Uncomfortable. Amara looked away for a brief moment, then back at him. I wanted closure, she said. Obinna studied her face, then nodded. All right, he said. You have it. That wasn't the response she expected. Again, she reached into her bag slowly and pulled out the engagement ring. For a moment, she held it tightly, as though it carried weight, as though it still meant something. Then, she walked forward and placed it on the small table between them. I don't need this anymore, she said. The words sounded familiar, but this time, there was something different in her tone. Not stronger, not colder, but slightly less certain. Obinna looked at the ring, then at her. You're right, he said. That was it. No emotion, no resistance, no attempt to change her mind. And somehow, that hit harder than anything else. Richard pushed himself off the wall. Well, that's done, he said casually. Let's go. Amara didn't move immediately, just for a second. Her eyes lingered on Obinna, searching, waiting, for something, anything. But she found nothing. So she turned and walked toward the door. Richard followed. As they stepped outside, the noise of the street returned. Voices, laughter, movement, life continuing as if nothing had happened. The Ferrari engine started again. Loud, powerful, final. Obinna stood at the doorway watching them, not with longing, not with regret, but with clarity. Amara entered the car. Richard followed. The door shut, and just like before, the car drove off, leaving behind dust and silence. Obinna remained there for a while, standing, thinking, processing. Then slowly, he walked back inside, closed the door, and picked up the ring from the table. He held it in his palm, looked at it, then closed his hand around it, not as something lost, but as something revealed. Because in that moment, Obinna understood something deeply. Money didn't change people. It exposed them. And Amara? She had been exposed completely. The apartment was quiet again. But this time, it didn't feel empty. Felt clear. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, casting golden light across the streets, Obinna stepped outside. Not to think, not to dwell, but simply to walk. And as he moved through the neighborhood, unnoticed, unrecognized, stripped of everything that once defined him, he felt something unexpected. Freedom. Because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't surrounded by people who wanted something from him. He was just a man. And sometimes, that's where real life begins. The evening settled gently over the neighborhood, the sun melting into a warm orange glow that stretched across the dusty roads. Lagos never truly slept, but it did slow down just enough for people to breathe. For some, it was a time to return home. For others, it was a time to keep pushing. For Obinna, it was a time he didn't quite understand yet. He walked without direction. No destination. No urgency. Just movement. His polished shoes, once accustomed to marble floors and quiet hallways, now met uneven ground, dust, stones, worn paths shaped by years of survival. And strangely, he didn't mind. There was something honest about this place. No pretenses, no masks, no carefully rehearsed affection. What you saw was what you got. And after everything he had just experienced, That honesty felt refreshing. But even in that quiet realization, the weight of the day lingered. Amara's face, her voice, the way she walked away again, this time without even a shadow of doubt. Obinna had expected pain, but what he felt instead was emptiness. Clean break, like a page had been torn out of his life completely. He finally stopped walking when his legs began to ache slightly. A small roadside space came into view, a worn wooden bench beside a narrow path, partially shaded by a tree that had clearly seen better days. He sat down, slowly, leaning forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his hands loosely clasped. For the first time since everything unfolded, he allowed himself to be still. The world moved around him. Voices passed. Footsteps echoed. Laughter rose and fell. But Obinna didn't engage. He simply existed in that moment. Quiet, unnoticed, and for once, unburdened by expectations. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. Time felt different when you stopped measuring it. Then, a voice, soft, gentle, unfamiliar. "Sir, are you okay?" Obinna didn't respond immediately, not because he hadn't heard, but because the question itself felt unexpected. He slowly lifted his head, and that was when he saw her. She stood a few steps away, balancing a tray of oranges on her head with effortless grace. Her clothes were simple, a faded dress, slightly worn but clean. Her sandals had clearly seen long days of walking. But her face carried something rare. Kindness, unfiltered, uncalculated. She stepped closer when he didn't answer. "Are you sure you're okay?" she asked again, her brows slightly furrowed. Obinna studied her for a moment, not suspiciously, just curious. "I'm fine," he said eventually. She tilted her head slightly, clearly unconvinced. "You don't look fine." That caught him off guard. Not the words, but the honesty. He let out a quiet breath. "I've had a long day," he admitted. She nodded slowly, as if that explained everything. Without another word, she carefully lowered the tray from her head and placed it on a nearby surface. Then she picked up one orange. "Take," she said, holding it out to him. Obinna blinked. "What?" "Take," she repeated gently. "You need it." He looked at the orange, then at her. "I don't have money on me," he said. She shrugged lightly. "I didn't ask for money." That was new. Obinna hesitated for a second, then reached out and took the orange. "Thank you," he said. She smiled. Not the practiced smile he was used to, not the kind meant to impress, but something simple, real. "Peel it," she said. "It helps." Obinna almost smiled. Almost. He began peeling it slowly, the scent of citrus filling the air. Fresh, sharp, unexpectedly comforting. She sat down on the other end of the bench, leaving a respectful space between them. Not too close, not distant either, just right. For a while, neither of them spoke. Obinna ate the orange quietly, and somehow tasted better than it should have. "My name is Ada," she said suddenly. He glanced at her. "Obinna." She nodded. "Nice to meet you, Obinna." There was no recognition in her tone, no reaction to his name, no shift in attitude. To her, he was just a man sitting by the roadside, and that realization felt strange, but not in a bad way. "What happened?" she asked after a moment. Obinna paused. "I lost something," he said carefully. Ada looked at him, not with curiosity, but with understanding. "Something important?" "Yes." She nodded slowly, then looked ahead, her gaze settling on the road. "People lose things all the time," she said. Obinna raised an eyebrow slightly. "That's supposed to make me feel better?" She smiled faintly. "No." Pause. "It's just the truth." He studied her again. There was no pity in her voice, no attempt to comfort him with empty words, just honesty. "What if it's not something you can replace?" he asked. Ada shrugged lightly. Then you learn how to live without it. The answer was simple, but it carried weight. Obina leaned back slightly. You make it sound easy. It's not, she said. Another pause. But it's possible. Silence returned. But this time, felt different. Lighter. After a while, Ada stood up and lifted her tray again. I have to go, she said. Obina nodded. She took a step, then paused. I'll bring you food tomorrow, she added casually. Obina blinked. You don't even know where I live. She pointed lightly toward the street. I've seen you around. That surprised him. Before he could respond, she smiled again. I'll find you. And then she walked away. Obina watched her go. Her steps steady. Her presence quiet but noticeable. He didn't fully understand what had just happened. A stranger had approached him, spoken to him, fed him, offered him something. Not money, not opportunity, not advantage, just kindness. And somehow, that felt more valuable than everything he had lost. The next day, Obina found himself sitting in the same spot. At the same time, he wasn't sure why. Maybe curiosity, maybe something else. But he waited. And just as the sun began to soften again, she appeared, carrying her tray, walking with the same steady rhythm. When she saw him, she smiled, like she had expected him to be there. I told you I would find you, she said. This time she didn't bring just oranges. She brought food, wrapped carefully, simple, but prepared with effort. For you, she said, handing it to him. Obina took it slowly. You didn't have to do this. I know, she replied. And that was it. No explanation, no expectation, just giving. As he opened the food, the warm scent rose into the air. And for a brief moment, something inside him shifted. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but quietly, because sometimes healing doesn't come from grand gestures or big moments. Sometimes comes from a stranger who simply chooses to be kind. The next evening came with a quiet kind of anticipation. Subtle, almost unnoticeable, but present. Obina didn't question it. He didn't sit down and analyze why he found himself walking back to that same roadside bench at almost the exact same time as the day before. He just went. The sun was beginning its slow descent again, stretching warm gold across the dusty street. The air carried familiar sounds, distant chatter, clinking bottles, the hum of everyday survival. But this time something felt different. Or maybe he felt different. He reached the bench and sat down. Same position, same stillness. But unlike yesterday, his mind wasn't heavy. It wasn't replaying Amara's words, or the sound of that Ferrari driving away. Those memories were still there, but quieter now, less sharp, less important. He didn't have to wait long. Obina, her voice was unmistakable, soft, steady, and oddly comforting. He looked up. Ada was walking toward him, the tray of oranges balanced neatly on her head as always. But this time, she carried something else in her hand, a small wrapped container. You came back, he said. She smiled lightly. I said I would. There was no pride in her voice, no need to emphasize her reliability. She simply stated it like a fact. She lowered the tray and placed it beside the bench before sitting down. Not too close, not too far, just like before. I brought food, she said, handing him the container. Obina took it, looking at it briefly. You really didn't have to do this. I know, she replied again in that same simple way. No explanation, no justification, just choice. He opened the container. Inside was a modest meal, rice and stew, neatly arranged, still warm. You cooked this? He asked. Ada nodded. For me? He added. Yes. The answer was so direct that it almost made him pause. Why? He asked. She tilted her head slightly, as if the question itself was strange. You looked like you needed it. That was it. Obinna leaned back slightly, letting out a quiet breath. In his world, nothing came without reason. Nothing came without expectation. Even kindness had a cost. But here, there was none. And that unsettled him. Just a little. He took a bite. And for a moment, he forgot everything else. The food wasn't elaborate. It wasn't something served in fine dining restaurants. But it was good. Warm. Comforting. Real. Ada watched him quietly. Not in a way that demanded approval, but with a quiet awareness. "It's good," he said. She smiled faintly. "I'm glad." They sat in silence for a while, but it wasn't the kind of silence that felt awkward or forced. It was easy. "So," she said after a moment, "did you lose something again today?" Obinna almost laughed. "No," he said. "I think I've lost enough for now." She nodded thoughtfully. "That's good. What about you?" he asked. "Did you sell all your oranges?" She shook her head slightly. "Not all, but enough." "What happens if you don't sell them?" She shrugged lightly. "I try again tomorrow." The simplicity of her answer caught him off guard again. "You're not worried?" he asked. "About what?" "About not making enough money." Ada looked at him for a moment. Then, "I'm always worried," she said. A pause. "But worrying doesn't change anything." Obinna leaned forward slightly. "You say things like it's that simple." "It's not simple," she replied. Another pause. "But it's true." He studied her face, trying to understand her, trying to place her. She wasn't naive. He could see that. Her words weren't empty optimism. They came from experience. From living a life where things didn't always go as planned. "Where's your family?" he asked after a while. Ada's expression softened slightly. "My mother passed away," she said. "I'm sorry." She nodded. "I was younger then. Since that time, it's just been me." Obinna didn't interrupt. "I learned early," she continued, "that nobody is coming to fix things for you." A small pause. "So you learn to fix what you can, and live with what you can't." The words settled between them, quiet, but heavy. Obinna looked down at his hands briefly, then back at her. "You're stronger than you look," he said. Ada smiled faintly. "People say that." "I believe it," he added. She didn't respond immediately, but something in her expression shifted slightly. Not pride, not surprise, just acknowledgement. The sun dipped lower. Shadows stretched longer. And still, neither of them felt the need to leave. Days turned into a pattern. Obinna would sit at the same spot. Ada would come. Sometimes with oranges. Sometimes with food. Sometimes with nothing but conversation. And slowly, something began to change. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't dramatic. But Obinna found himself looking forward to those moments. Not because he needed help. Not because he was lonely. But because, with Ada, things felt different. There was no pressure. No expectations. No hidden motives. Just presence. One evening, as they sat together again, Ada noticed something. "You don't look sad anymore," she said. Obinna raised an eyebrow. "Was I that obvious?" "Yes. And now?" She studied him for a moment. "Now, you look like you're thinking," she said. He smiled slightly. "That's an improvement." She nodded. "It is." A brief silence followed. Then, "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Go ahead. What exactly did you lose?" The question lingered. Obinna looked ahead, watching a group of children playing in the distance. "A person," he said finally. Ada didn't react immediately. "Someone you loved?" she asked. "Yes." She nodded slowly. "Then maybe you didn't lose them," she said. Obinna turned slightly. "What do you mean?" She met his gaze. "Maybe you just saw them clearly." The words hit differently. Not because they were complicated, but because they were accurate. Obinna leaned back slightly, exhaling. "You have a way of saying things," he said. Ada smiled. I just say what I see. And what do you see now? He asked. She looked at him for a moment. Really looked. I see someone who is starting to understand something important, she said. And what is that? That not everything you lose is meant to be kept. Silence followed. But it wasn't empty. It was full of realization. Because deep down, Obinna knew she was right. And for the first time since everything began, he didn't feel like he had lost something valuable. He felt like he had been spared. As the night settled in and Ada prepared to leave, she picked up her tray again. I'll see you tomorrow, she said. Obinna nodded. Tomorrow, he repeated. And as she walked away, disappearing into the quiet rhythm of the street, Obinna remained there for a moment longer. Not thinking, not analyzing, just feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Because sometimes, the simplest acts of kindness have the power to rebuild what the world tries to break. What started as coincidence slowly became routine, and what began as routine quietly turned into something neither of them planned. Every evening, just as the sun softened and the heat loosened its grip on the day, Obinna found himself drawn to the same place, the same wooden bench, the same stretch of road, the same moment where the noise of the world slowed just enough for something real to exist. And every evening, Ada came. First, it had been simple. Kind gesture, conversation, a shared silence. But as days turned into weeks, those moments began to stretch, deepen, mean more than they were supposed to. Obinna noticed it first, not as a sudden realization, but as a quiet shift. He began to look forward to seeing her, not casually, not passively, but intentionally. His steps toward the roadside became more certain, his time there more deliberate, and when she was late, even by a few minutes, he noticed. He didn't like that he noticed, but he did. Ada, on the other hand, didn't overthink it. At least, not at first. To her, Obinna was simply someone she met at a moment when he needed kindness. And she gave it, because that was who she was. But slowly, even she began to feel it. The conversations lasted longer. The silences became more comfortable. The space between them, once carefully maintained, began to shrink. One evening, the change became undeniable. Ada arrived later than usual. The sky had already begun to darken, the streetlights flickering to life one by one. Obinna was already there, waiting. When she approached, slightly out of breath, she smiled apologetically. I'm sorry, she said. Today was busy. Obinna looked at her. Really looked. It's fine, he said. But his tone carried something new, something relieved. Ada noticed. You waited, she said. He hesitated. Then, yes. A small silence followed. Then she smiled. Not wide, not playful, but something softer, warmer. I'm glad, she said. And just like that, something shifted. That evening they didn't just sit and talk. They walked, slowly, side by side, along the quiet stretch of road. The world around them moved as it always did, but somehow it felt distant, less important. Tell me something about you, Ada said. Obinna glanced at her. What do you want to know? Anything, she replied. A memory, a story, something that makes you you. He thought for a moment. Then, I used to believe that if you worked hard enough, planned everything carefully, and made the right decisions, nothing would go wrong. Ada listened quietly. I built my life around that idea, he continued. Control, structure, certainty. And now? She asked. Obinna exhaled lightly. Now I know. That's not how life works. Ada nodded slowly. Life doesn't follow plans, she said. No, he agreed. It doesn't. They walked in silence for a while. Then, what about you? He asked. What makes you you? Ada smiled faintly. I wake up every day and try again, she said. That's it. She nodded. That's it. Obinna looked at her, studying her expression. "You don't want more?" he asked. She stopped walking, turned to face him. "Of course I want more," she said. A small pause. "But I don't let what I don't have stop me from appreciating what I do have." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Obinna felt it, because for most of his life, he had been focused on what was next, what was bigger, what was more. But Ada, she lived in what was, and somehow, that made her richer than most people he knew. Days passed, then weeks. The connection between them deepened. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't forced. It grew naturally, like something that didn't need permission to exist. One evening, as they sat together again, a light rain began to fall. First it was gentle, barely noticeable. Then it grew. Ada laughed softly, standing up. "We should go," she said. But Obinna didn't move immediately. Instead, he looked up at the sky, then back at her. "When was the last time you just stayed?" he asked. Ada blinked. "In the rain." "Yes." She hesitated. Then, "I don't remember." Obinna stood up slowly. "Then stay," he said. She looked at him, really looked. And for a moment, she saw something different. Not the quiet man who sat on the roadside. Not the one who spoke calmly and observed everything. But someone open. So she stayed. The rain fell harder, soaking them both. But neither of them moved. Ada laughed again, brushing wet strands of hair from her face. "This is crazy," she said. "Is it?" Obinna replied. She looked at him, then smiled. "Maybe not," she said. And in that moment, everything felt light, simple, real. Later that evening, as the rain slowed and the air cooled, they found shelter under a small structure nearby. Ada wrapped her arms around herself slightly, shivering. Without thinking, Obinna removed his jacket and placed it over her shoulders. She looked at him, surprised. "You'll be cold," she said. "I'll be fine." She hesitated. Then, "Thank you." Their eyes met, and this time, neither of them looked away immediately. There was something there, something unspoken, but undeniable, and they both felt it. That night, as they prepared to go their separate ways, Ada paused. "Obinna," she said softly. "Yes." She hesitated, just for a moment. Then, "I'm glad I met you." The words were simple, but they carried meaning. Obinna stepped closer. "So am I," he replied. Another pause. Then, without overthinking it, without planning, without analyzing, he reached for her hand, gently, and she didn't pull away. Instead, she held on. And just like that, something new began, not built on wealth, not built on status, not built on appearance, but on something far more rare, something honest, something real, love, without conditions. For a long time Obinna avoided the truth, not because he was afraid of it, but because he knew exactly what it could cost him. Every evening with Ada had become something steady, something he relied on more than he wanted to admit. What began as a simple act of kindness had grown into something deeper, something fragile in its own quiet way. She trusted him, not because of what he had, but because of who she believed he was. And that was the problem, because who she believed he was wasn't the full truth. Obinna Okafor, the man who once lived in a mansion, who controlled millions, who moved through Lagos like a force, had allowed himself to become someone else in her eyes. A struggling man, a man who had lost everything, a man rebuilding from nothing. And Ada loved that man. That realization stayed with him. It followed him even when they laughed, even when they sat in silence, even when she looked at him with that quiet, steady warmth that made everything else feel distant. Because every moment with her was built on a lie. And Obinna wasn't a man who built anything important on false foundations. The decision came slowly, not in one moment, but in many. A pause in conversation, a lingering look, a question she asked that he couldn't fully answer. "Why don't you try reaching out to old business partners?" she asked one evening as they sat together. Obinna hesitated. "I will," he said, but she tilted her head slightly. "You always say that," she replied. He didn't respond, and in that silence, he felt it again, that weight. The truth was no longer something he could delay. If what they had was real, then it had to survive honesty, even if that honesty risked everything. The next day, Obinna didn't go to their usual spot. Instead, he waited, and just as he expected, Ada came looking for him. She found him standing near the edge of the street, his posture different, still, but not relaxed. "You didn't come today," she said, walking toward him. "I know," he replied. She studied his face. Something was off. "Is everything okay?" she asked. Obinna looked at her, really looked, and for the first time since they met, there was hesitation in his eyes. "No," he said quietly. Ada's expression softened immediately. "What's wrong?" she asked. Obinna took a breath. "I need to show you something," he said. She frowned slightly. "Show me what?" "The truth." The words felt heavier than he expected. Ada didn't understand. Not yet, but she nodded. "Okay," she said. Obinna gestured toward the road. Car was waiting. Not just any car. A sleek black luxury vehicle. Clean, polished, out of place. Ada stopped walking. "This is yours?" she asked slowly. "Yes." Her brows furrowed. "I thought you said." "I did." He cut in gently. "And I'll explain." There was uncertainty in her eyes now. Confusion. A quiet tension beginning to form. But she still followed him. They got into the car. The drive was silent. Ada sat stiffly, her hands resting in her lap, her mind racing. Nothing made sense. She glanced at him a few times, but he didn't speak, because he knew words wouldn't be enough. They needed to arrive. When the car finally slowed, the large gates came into view. Tall, imposing, familiar. Ada's eyes widened slightly. The gates opened, and as the car drove in, everything changed. The mansion stood exactly as it always had. Grand, elegant, untouched. Ada's breath caught. She turned slowly toward Obinna. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Obinna didn't answer immediately. The car came to a stop. He stepped out, then opened the door for her. Ada hesitated, then stepped out slowly. Her eyes moved across the property, taking everything in, trying to understand. "This is your house?" she asked. "Yes." The word hit differently now. Ada shook her head slightly. "No, that's not possible," she said. "You told me you lost everything." Obinna stepped closer. "I didn't." Silence. The world seemed to pause. "You didn't?" she repeated. "No." Her expression changed. Confusion turning into realization. Realization turning into something else. "You lied to me," she said. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp. Obinna didn't deny it. "Yes," he said. That was all it took. Ada stepped back. All the warmth in her expression disappeared. "You lied to me," she repeated, her voice stronger now. "I needed to know the truth," he said. "Whose truth?" she snapped. "Yours or mine?" Obinna held her gaze. "The truth about the person I was going to marry," he said. "And what does that have to do with me?" she asked, hurt clearly breaking through now. "Everything," he replied. Ada laughed bitterly. "So I was part of your test?" she said. "No," Obinna said quickly. "You were never part of the test." "But you lied to me," she insisted. "Yes," he said again. The honesty didn't help. It only made it worse. Ada turned away, running a hand through her hair. "This is unbelievable," she muttered. Obinna stepped closer. "I lost someone because of that lie," he said. She turned back sharply. And what do you think you're about to lose now? She asked. The question landed hard, because for the first time, Obinna didn't have control over the outcome. I needed to know if love could exist without money, he said. And now you think you've found it? She replied. He didn't hesitate. Yes. That answer made her pause, but only for a moment. You didn't trust her, Ada said. No. And now, you expect me to trust you? The question cut deeper than anything else. Obinna didn't answer immediately, because the truth was, he didn't have a good answer. I'm telling you now, he said finally. After weeks, she replied. Yes. And you think that fixes it? No, he admitted. Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Real. Ada looked at him, not with anger alone, but with disappointment. You made me believe you were someone else, she said. I showed you who I am without everything else, he replied. That wasn't your choice, she said. That was your lie. Obinna took a step closer. But what we had, that was real, he said. Ada's eyes filled with emotion. I don't know what was real anymore, she whispered. That was the moment everything hung in the balance. Because love, no matter how strong, cannot survive without trust. And right now, trust was broken. Ada took a step back. I need time, she said. Obinna nodded. He didn't try to stop her. Didn't try to convince her. Because for once, he understood something clearly. This wasn't something he could control. This wasn't business. This wasn't strategy. This was real. And real things took time. As Ada turned and walked toward the gate, her steps slower now, heavier than before, Obinna stood there, watching, not as a man testing someone anymore, but as a man who had finally risked something that mattered. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure what the outcome would be. Time passed differently after the truth came out. Not slower, not faster, just heavier. For the first time in a long while, Obinna felt something he wasn't used to feeling. Uncertainty. Not in business, not in money, but in something far more delicate. Something he couldn't negotiate, couldn't plan, couldn't control. Ada. The day she walked away from the mansion, asking for time, stayed with him. Not because she left, but because she had every right to. Obinna didn't try to call her, didn't send messages, didn't go looking for her. Not because he didn't want to, but because he understood something important. If what they had was real, couldn't be forced. Days turned into a week, then another. The roadside bench remained empty. Obinna passed by it once. Just once. He didn't sit, didn't wait. He simply stood there for a moment, looking at the space where everything had started. Then he left, because hope, when handled carelessly, can turn into desperation, and Obinna refused to let that happen. Meanwhile, Ada struggled, not outwardly, not in a way anyone around her could easily see. She still woke up early, still carried her tray of oranges, still walked the same streets, still smiled at customers. But inside was chaos. Every step she took felt heavier. Every moment alone felt louder. Because no matter how much she tried to push it away, Obinna's face kept finding its way back into her thoughts. His voice, his presence, the way he listened, the way he looked at her. Not like someone beneath him, not like someone to be pitied, but like someone who mattered. And then, the lie. That part hurt the most. Not because he was rich, not because he had a mansion, but because he had hidden it. He had built something with her, without telling her the full truth. And trust, once broken, was not something she gave back easily. One evening, as Ada sat outside her small room, peeling oranges for the next day, her friend Ngozi walked in. Ngozi had always been sharp, the kind of person who noticed things quickly. You've been quiet, she said, sitting down beside her. Ada didn't look up. I'm fine. Ngozi scoffed lightly. No, you're not. Silence. You met someone, didn't you? Ngozi continued. Ada's hands paused slightly. That was enough of an answer. Ngozi leaned back, crossing her arms. And let me guess. He did something stupid. Ada let out a small breath. He lied, she said. Ngozi nodded slowly. Of course he did. Ada glanced at her. You say that like it's normal. It is, Ngozi replied. Men lie, especially when they have something to hide. Ada shook her head. It's not like that. Then what is it like? Ngozi asked. Ada hesitated. He pretended to be poor, she said finally. Ngozi blinked, then laughed. Wait, what? He said he lost everything, Ada continued. But he didn't. He's rich, very rich. Ngozi's laughter faded into disbelief. So he lied about being broke? She said. Yes. And you're upset about that? Ada looked at her. He didn't trust me, she said. Ngozi tilted her head slightly. Or maybe he was trying to understand you, she replied. Ada frowned. That's not the same thing. No, Ngozi agreed. It's not. Pause. But tell me something, Ngozi added. When he was broke, how did he treat you? Ada didn't answer immediately, because she already knew the answer. He was kind, she said softly. Ngozi nodded. Did he respect you? Yes. Did he look down on you? No. Ngozi leaned forward slightly. Then maybe the part that matters wasn't the lie. Ada shook her head. It matters, she insisted. I didn't say it doesn't, Ngozi replied. But is it the only thing that matters? Silence, because that question was harder to answer. That night, Ada didn't sleep easily. Her mind replayed everything. The first orange, the conversations, the laughter, the rain, the way he held her hand. And then, the moment at the mansion, the truth. But even in that truth, one thing remained unchanged. The way he looked at her. That hadn't been fake. That hadn't been calculated. That had been real. And Ada knew it. The next evening, without fully deciding to, she found herself walking toward the roadside bench. Her steps slowed as she got closer. Her heart beat slightly faster. And then, she saw him, sitting there, just like before. Still, quiet, waiting. He looked up as she approached. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Then, you came back, he said softly. Ada stopped a few steps away. I wasn't sure I would, she admitted. Obinna nodded. I wasn't sure either, he replied. A small silence followed. Then she walked closer, slowly, carefully, and sat down. Not as close as before, but not far either. Have you been here every day? She asked. No, he said. Pause. Just today. Ada nodded. That's good, she said. Why? Because I didn't want you to wait for me, she replied. Obinna smiled faintly. I wasn't waiting, he said. Ada raised an eyebrow. You were sitting on our spot. He looked at her. Maybe I was hoping, he corrected. That made her pause. Because hope was honest, and honesty was what they needed. I'm still upset, she said. I know, and I don't trust you completely. I understand, and I don't like what you did. I don't blame you. Each response came without defense, without excuse, just acceptance. And somehow, that made it harder to stay angry. Ada looked at him for a long moment. Then, why didn't you tell me earlier? She asked. Obinna exhaled slowly. Because I was afraid, he said. She blinked. Afraid? Yes. Of what? Of losing something real, he replied. The honesty in his voice was unmistakable. Ada felt it. And for the first time since everything happened, her anger softened. Not completely, but enough. I don't know if I can go back to how things were, she said. I don't want that, Obinna replied. She frowned slightly. You don't. No, he said. I want something better. Pause. Something honest. Ada looked at him, and in that moment, she made a decision. Not fully, not permanently, but enough to take a step forward. Then we start again, she said. Obinna nodded. From the truth this time. Yes, she agreed. And just like that, a new beginning was formed. Not perfect, not easy, but real. And sometimes, that's all that matters. Life had settled into something new. Not the old life Obinna once knew. Filled with polished meetings, quiet deals, and carefully structured routines. And not the life he briefly lived in that small apartment either. This was something else entirely. Something balanced. The mansion was alive again, but different. Where once it felt like a symbol of power, now it felt like a home. Laughter echoed more freely through its halls. The staff moved with ease, no longer under silent tension. And at the center of it all was Ada. She hadn't changed in the way people expected. She didn't suddenly become someone else just because she now lived in wealth. She still woke up early, still preferred simple meals, still spoke with the same calm honesty that had first caught Obinna's attention. The only difference was, she now had more comfort, more security, more opportunity, but she carried it lightly. Obinna noticed it every day. The way she treated people, the way she handled things, the way she never let the environment change who she was. And every time he saw it, he was reminded of why he chose her. Their wedding had been simple, intimate, not because Obinna couldn't afford something grand, but because neither of them wanted it. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about meaning something, and it did. Weeks passed peacefully, until one afternoon, the past came knocking. It started at the gate. The security guards noticed her immediately, not because she looked important, but because she didn't. Her clothes were worn, her posture uncertain, her face tired. She stood there for a moment, as if gathering courage. Then she spoke. I need to see Obinna, she said. The guards exchanged a glance. Do you have an appointment? One of them asked. She shook her head. No. Then you can't. Please, she interrupted. Her voice cracked slightly. It's important. Something in her tone made them pause. Your name? The guard asked. She hesitated. Then, Amara. The name carried weight. Even now, the guards recognized it. They had heard stories, seen things, and after a brief moment of consideration, one of them stepped aside. Wait here, he said. Inside the mansion, Obinna was in his office when the message came. Sir, there's someone at the gate asking for you. Who? He asked, not looking up. The guard hesitated. She said her name is Amara. Everything paused. Not outwardly, not dramatically, but internally, something shifted. Obinna closed the file in front of him slowly. Let her in, he said. His voice was calm, controlled, but his mind was already preparing. Moments later, Amara walked into the mansion. The same mansion she once walked through effortlessly. The same space she once called home. But now, everything felt different. She moved slowly, her eyes scanning the room, taking in the details, the familiarity, the distance. Nothing had changed, and yet, everything had. When she saw Obinna, standing across the room, her composure cracked. For a brief moment, she didn't look like the confident woman who once walked away. She looked lost. Obinna, she said softly. He nodded slightly. Amara. Silence followed. Heavy, uncomfortable. She took a few steps forward. I didn't know if you would see me, she said. I almost didn't, he replied. The honesty hit immediately. Amara swallowed. I deserve that, she said quietly. Obinna didn't respond. He simply waited, because he already knew. She didn't come here to exchange pleasantries. I made a mistake, she said, straight to the point. But this time, there was no confidence behind her words, only regret. What kind of mistake? Obinna asked. Amara hesitated. Then, the man I left with, she began. Richard. Her voice faltered. He's not who I thought he was. Obinna remained still. He's a scammer, she continued. He used me. Everything I thought he had. It was fake. Pause. We were arrested, she added, her voice barely steady now. Obinna's expression didn't change. For fraud, she said. The words hung in the air. He got bail, she continued. I didn't. Silence. I was in jail, she said. That part carried weight. Real weight. Not long, she added quickly. But long. Enough. Obinna studied her face. There were signs. Subtle, but clear. She wasn't lying. I lost everything, she said. The irony didn't escape either of them. Not this time. And now? Obinna asked. Amara looked at him. Now, I understand, she said. Understand what? What I had, she replied. Silence again. Because this was familiar. Too familiar. I heard about you, she continued. That you're doing well. That you got married. Obinna didn't deny it. Yes. Amara's eyes dropped briefly. I came to apologize, she said. Obinna nodded slowly. Accepted, he replied. She looked up quickly. That's it? She asked. What else were you expecting? Her lips parted slightly. I thought maybe. She couldn't finish the sentence. But Obinna understood. No, he said calmly. That single word ended it. But she wasn't done. I was wrong, she said, her voice breaking now. I see that now. I was selfish. I was blind. Obinna said nothing. I chose money over everything, she continued. And I lost everything because of it. There were tears now. Real ones. Please, she said. That word again. But this time, carried no power. Please give me another chance. There it was. The real reason she came. Not just apology, but hope. Hope that something could be restored. But Obinna's expression didn't change. Because for him, there was nothing left to restore. Before he could respond, a soft voice entered the room. Obinna, Ada. She stepped into the room, her presence calm but commanding in its own quiet way. Amara turned, and everything hit her at once. The difference, the contrast, the reality. Ada stood there, not dressed extravagantly, not trying to impress, but grounded, secure, certain. Is everything okay? Ada asked. Obinna nodded. Yes. Ada's eyes moved to Amara. She didn't need an introduction. She already knew, and Amara knew it too. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Amara let out a small, broken breath. You replaced me, she whispered. The words carried pain, but also realization. Obinna shook his head slightly. No, he said. Pause. You replaced yourself. Silence. Final. Because there was no argument for that. No defense. No way to undo what had been done. Amara's shoulders dropped. The fight left her completely. She looked between them one last time, then turned, and walked away. No dramatic exit. No final words. Just acceptance. As the door closed behind her, the weight she brought with her disappeared. And just like that, the past stayed where it belonged. Behind them, the gates closed with a quiet finality. Not loud, not dramatic, just a soft, mechanical sound that carried more meaning than any words spoken inside the mansion. Obinna stood where he was for a moment longer, his eyes fixed on the direction Amara had disappeared. There was no anger in his expression, no satisfaction, no regret, just stillness. Some endings didn't come with noise. They came with clarity, and this was one of them. Behind him, Ada remained where she stood. She hadn't interrupted, hadn't rushed forward, hadn't demanded explanations, because she understood something important. Moments like that didn't need interference. They needed space. After a few seconds, Obinna turned. Their eyes met, and in that look, everything unspoken passed between them. "Are you okay?" Ada asked softly. Obinna nodded. "Yes." Pause. "Are you?" Ada stepped closer. "I am," she said. She wasn't shaken, wasn't threatened, wasn't uncertain, because what she had with Obinna was not built on assumption. It had been tested, broken, rebuilt, and that made it stronger than anything Amara could return to. They stood there in silence for a moment. Then Ada reached for his hand. Not hesitantly, not carefully, but naturally, and Obinna held it, firm, certain. That small gesture said everything words couldn't. The past had come, the past had spoken, and the past had left, without taking anything with it. Later that evening, the mansion felt lighter, not because something had been added, but because something had been removed. A chapter that once held weight had finally been closed. Obinna sat in the living room, the soft glow of the lights casting calm shadows across the space. Ada walked in a few moments later, carrying 2 cups of tea. She handed one to him without a word and sat beside him. For a while they didn't speak. They didn't need to, because sometimes silence between 2 people isn't empty. It's full of understanding, full of peace. After a few minutes, Ada spoke. "She loved you," she said quietly. Obinna didn't respond immediately. Then, "Maybe," he said. Ada looked at him. "But not in the way that matters," he added. She nodded slowly. "Love that depends on things isn't really love," she said. Obinna glanced at her. "You sound certain." "I am," she replied. A pause. "Because I've seen both sides now," she added. That made him look at her more closely. "You mean before and after?" he asked. Ada smiled faintly. "I mean when things are easy, and when they're not." Obinna leaned back slightly. "That's the real test," he said. Ada nodded. "And not everyone passes it." Silence followed. But it wasn't heavy. It was reflective, peaceful. Across the city, far from the quiet comfort of the mansion, Amara walked alone. The streets didn't recognize her anymore. Not the way they used to. There were no admiring glances, no whispers of envy, no quiet admiration, just indifference. She moved slowly, her steps uncertain, her mind replaying everything that had just happened. Obinna's voice, his calm, his final words. "You replaced yourself." The truth in those words cut deeper than anything else. Because she knew he was right. She had made the choice. No one forced her. No one pressured her. She saw something she believed was better, and she went for it, without hesitation, without looking back. And now she was the one looking back, and there was nothing left. She stopped walking for a moment, her eyes stinging slightly, not just from regret, but from realization. She hadn't just lost Obinna. She had lost something far more valuable, something real, something rare. And the worst part? She didn't recognize it until it was gone. Back at the mansion, life moved forward. Not dramatically, not with grand declarations, but with quiet certainty. Days passed, then weeks. Obinna returned to his work, but with a difference. He was still focused, still disciplined, still sharp. But now, he made time. Time for things that didn't fit into spreadsheets. Time for moments that couldn't be measured in profit. Time for Ada. And Ada? She adjusted. But she didn't change. She still carried herself the same way. Still spoke with the same honesty. Still saw the world through the same grounded perspective. The mansion didn't change her. If anything, she changed the mansion. She brought warmth into spaces that once felt cold. Life into places that once felt quiet. meaning into things that once felt routine. And Obinna noticed it all. One evening, as they stood on the balcony overlooking the city, the lights of Lagos stretching endlessly into the night, Ada rested her head lightly against his shoulder. "Do you ever think about it?" she asked. "About what?" "The past," she said. Obinna was quiet for a moment. Then, "No," he replied. Ada tilted her head slightly. "Not at all." He looked at her. "Only as a lesson," he said. She nodded. "That's good," she said softly. A small silence followed. Then, "Do you regret it?" she asked. Obinna didn't hesitate. "No." The answer was simple, certain, because everything that happened led him here, to this moment, to this peace, to this love, and that was something he would never regret. Ada smiled slightly, closing her eyes for a moment. "I'm glad," she said. Obinna wrapped an arm around her gently, pulling her closer, and as they stood there, overlooking the city, surrounded by everything he once thought mattered, he realized something. None of it, the wealth, the power, the status, none of it meant anything without the right person beside you. And now he had that person. Not because of what he had, not because of what he could give, but because of who he was, and who she chose to love. Somewhere in the distance, the city continued its endless rhythm. People chasing dreams, making choices, winning, losing. But in that moment, none of that mattered, because inside that quiet space, Obinna had already found what so many people spend their entire lives searching for. Not just love, but the kind of love that stays. The kind of love that doesn't leave when things fall apart. The kind of love that doesn't need to be tested, because it has already proven itself. And as the night stretched on, wrapping the city in its calm embrace, one truth remained clear. Some people realize what they have too late, and some people find exactly what they were meant to have. Obinna, he found his. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to this channel and tell us where you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.